Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan, and today we are breaking down the Washington Commanders 2024 NFL offseason. We're going to be breaking down all the acquisitions and departures, and then also going over their draft picks as well. And then at the very end of the video, we're going to be going over the 2024 Commander schedule and giving our record prediction. So be sure to stay tuned for the entire video to see how we think the Commanders are going to do this season. Before we get into that, if you have not already, go ahead, like this video, subscribe to the Tracy Take, and ring that bell to get notified whenever we create new content. We have videos coming out Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time every single day. We're doing a full offseason recap series. We've already done both the South divisions, NFC and AFC, and so we still have the rest of the league to go over. So if you want to see when those videos come out, be sure to ring that bell to get notified. And Ryan, let's pull this up here. I'll just say this right now, kind of when I look at these stats here, because these are the 2023 team ranking stats that we got off of Pro Football Reference, it can really only go up here for the Commanders, if we're being completely honest.
Yeah.
Whole clean house as well. Dan Quinn coming in. Ron Rivera, I think Ron Rivera, understandably so, kind of gave up, just like the rest of the team gave up like halfway through the season. That's why I even think some of these numbers as well, especially like the passing, like that they were 18th overall in passing. I think some of those numbers might be a little bit higher probably than normal, even though they did have some good games in the middle of the season against Philly, against New England, against Seattle, where they all had like above 275 passing yards. But just in general, though, It just seemed like this team just didn't really care. I think they knew that. I think the defense knew the offense sucked. I think the offense knew the defense sucked. So I was just kind of like, there'd be times where I feel like there was a game where they were playing the Cowboys. I feel it was 10-10 or whatnot. Yeah, it was the Week 12 game. It was 10-10. I looked this up here. I think it was like 10-all. And then I think Sam Howell threw a pick. And then it's like the whole team just gave up. Like, okay, we're going to lose. And then it was like 45-10. Gave up 35 unanswered.
Yeah.
I feel like that was the whole theme of the Commanders team. Felt like Sam Howell wasn't put in a good situation. I feel bad for Terry McLaurin because he's one of the best receivers in the league. He's just been on some bad Commanders teams as well. And so I think this is a much, much needed, necessary rebuild that they're going through right now. Getting Jaden Daniels here really just kind of siphoned off a lot of the talent that they could have, like Montez Sweat moving on as well, Chase Young also. Mm-hmm. And so when you see these stats here, what are kind of some of your thoughts? Like, is there some sort of optimism? Just the fact that this is probably some of the worst overall numbers that I think that we've seen from any of the teams.
On the offensive side of the ball, I think that there should be some optimism. I think you look at bringing in Cliff Kingsbury. Jaden Daniels was the best quarterback in this draft, throwing outside the numbers. I believe he threw close to 20 touchdowns of passes, over 20 yards down the field to 0 interceptions in that same category. So, like, very impressive numbers there. I also think you look 27th in rushing. You have to think Jaden Daniels is going to account for at least another 400 or 500 more yards here, which I think will bump up this running total to probably actually be an above average rushing game if Jaden Daniels can stay healthy throughout the whole season. Yeah. The one thing that is going to be really concerning is the sacks allowed. They allowed 65 sacks, which was not a close second to their division rival, the New York Giants, who gave up like 25 more than that. Yeah. So definitely, I think some improvements there. They did get Brandon Coleman in the 3rd round. We'll get a little bit more into the draft picks later. But you want to see some improvements in that offensive line. I think Cliff Kingsbury can also do some things to scheme up some better matchups and just some easier plays and sets for this offensive line to run through that have less one-on-one matchups. The ball's going to be getting out of Jaden's hands quicker. And then 29th, Jaden Daniels very rarely put the ball at risk last year. And so I think that should also come down. Sam Howell, while I actually thought was good in the first half of the season, he did have a fair bit of turnovers there in the second half of the year before he was ultimately benched. So offensively, I definitely think that there is some hope. Defensively, I'm going to have to kind of go no. I think you got rid of Montez Sweat, your best pass rusher. You added Jerson Newton, who's going to kind of be a depth piece behind Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he'll get in that rotation there, but
yeah. I agree. That'll be something to it that we'll break down a little bit later here as well. And I think kind of before we kind of go down there, I kind of want to see the players that have moved on. That have moved on from. We'll say it's like all 3 coaches, head coach Ron Rivera, offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy, and the defense coordinator Jack Del Rio, all gone. Probably for good reasons,
Yeah.
actually. Some other players, though, Sadiq Charles as well, their left tackle, as you're talking about. Antonio Gibson has moved on as well. Cameron Curl, their safety, he's gone on to the Rams as well. Sam Howell, as we talked about, also. A lot of other names as well. And that moved on, especially then to kind of on the defensive side of the ball. Casey Toohill as well, edge rusher. He was outside of Montez Sweat. Montez Sweat only played 8 games there, and he was their leading sack rusher last year. Casey Toohill, he was their third leading defensive end with their total number of sacks at 5. So he's moving on, so trying to replace that as well. Chase Young also has moved on. If they moved, so 3 of their top 4 sack leaders are off the team from last year, and actually 2 of them only played half the season with them. So I think that's going to be interesting to go and see. I think an underrated one, maybe this isn't underrated, but Curtis Samuel leaving though.
Yeah.
They do have Jahan Dotson, so there is kind of some of that overlap there. But he was their number 2 receiver, and I kind of like fitting him in this system, kind of being opposite of Terry McLaurin. And so I think losing him, I'm curious to see if Jahan Dotson can take that next step, if some of these other younger receivers can take that next step. And they did add some pieces that we'll get into here in a second, but I think that's just going to be it. Curious to see, though, because I thought Curtis Samuel was a solid number 2 receiver for this team. But who knows? They said they have Jahan Dotson. They had other receivers that they added. We'll get to here in a second. Who on this list, Ryan, do you think is probably going to be the biggest loss for them?
I don't really think they lost. I mean, to be fair, you were the second overall pick. You're not going to have a lot of star-studded players that were on your roster. To me, I look at it and just the overall loss of depth. I think Jacoby Brissett, Kendall Fuller, like you said, Casey Toohill, Antonio Gibson, they did lose some depth pieces here and some guys that maybe in more of like veteran roles, and they brought in some younger players. So not necessarily like important losses in terms of like losing a big skill set, but this team is going to be much younger, a little more inexperienced. They're going to play like a young team. They're going to make probably more mistakes than they did last year. Just again, rookie mistakes. And so I definitely think they didn't lose too much, but that veteran presence, I think, is going to be something that is going to be missed, especially I think in the quarterback room with a young quarterback. I know they went out, and I guess it's a good transition over into the acquisitions, but they did bring in Marcus Mariota, Austin Eckler, and a few other guys in that like skill position player room with Jamison Crowder, Olamide Zacchaeus, Zach Ertz. They did bring in some good offensive line help as well. With Cornelius Lucas, Nick Algretti, and Tyler Biotish. And so, like, I think they brought in some good guys that can replace some of the veterans that they lost. But I don't think Marcus Mariota is quite on that same level as Jacoby Brissett is as a veteran quarterback. Austin Eckler, he's better than Antonio Gibson. So, again, just they kind of swapped out some players for some other players of maybe similar quality.
Yeah, well, and that's why I think then with that with Eckler, for example, I think he's going to be maybe a better complement to Brian Robinson Jr.
Yeah,
I also think too he's going to be a good veteran running back to have in the backfield with a rookie quarterback there to help pick out some blocking assignments, but also a guy that he can lean on for dump off passes, for screen passes, or whatnot. That was Austin Eckler. Every fantasy guy loves Austin Eckler just because that was his big thing with in those PPR leagues. I will say, as a Falcons fan, as you can tell, I do like Olamide Zacchaeus. I think he is a solid just receiver for really any offense in the league here. I think he is just I think he's kind of a chameleon. You can kind of put him in any offense, and he's going to be able to create space. He's not going to be a 1,000-yard receiver, but I think he's could be a guy that they can rely on. Hopefully, help replace some of those stats that Curtis Samuel had moved on from. I think it was just 600 yards. 613 is what Curtis Samuel had. So I think he can. I think he can get that as well, and also be he's a veteran receiver that Jaden Daniels can rely on. Big one though, I think Tyler Biotish coming over from Dallas. He was their starting center over there following Dan Quinn here. I think that's going to be a big thing as we kind of go into that depth chart here in a second on the offensive side of the ball. Hopefully trying to bring some synchronicity, I think, to that offensive line and helping out blocking assignments. Having a veteran center just like Tyler Biotish is going to help out a lot. And so on the defense side of the ball, they address every single area in free agency. Several edge rushers who have some potential. bringing back Bobby Wagner, who played with Dan Quinn back in the day, Mikael Walker as well, Frankie Louvu also. So and again, Michael Davis, James Pierre, and Jeremy Chin as well, especially Jeremy Chin. They, as you saw in the previous stats, worst defense in the league,
Yeah.
worst passing defense in the league. That will be something I'll always remember on how lucky you get once, like New England Patriots, the rich get richer, when they pass on Christian Gonzalez and so went with Emmanuel Forbes, who ended up getting benched halfway through the season just because he just wasn't there. I just don't think it was a first round corner when you could have Christian Gonzalez. And so I think you're going through and getting more secondary pieces, trying to make that better. Can't get any worse than what it was last year. And so
Yeah.
I just kind of like the overall, just kind of broad stroke of talent that they brought in. Not too many great, crazy guys, but at the same time, I think veteran players who Dan Quinn can definitely work with kind of in this transitional rebuild year.
Yeah. My big thing here is none of these guys are really proven guys. They're all like semi-veteran, kind of like rotational players. Bobby Wagner is, I think, an exception here, as he is a Pro Bowl, All-Pro linebacker, but he's like 35 now, so
Yeah,
it's not quite the same Bobby Wagner from 5-10 years ago. So that's all like going to be really interesting to see what Dan Quinn can do to piece these guys together. But
this
definitely,
to add on your point, this to me is kind of a journeyman type free agency class on a
yeah,
rebuilding team.
yeah.
They got a lot of guys that come in, guys get hurt, can also then teach some of these younger guys as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to go. It's like I think they brought in a bunch of veterans to kind of set a baseline because, as I said in the previous slide, I think like overall there's not one player that sticks out. It's just the loss of like veteran talent in that room of like some depth guys that may not be the premier players, but they can be guides for younger players and help kind of show them the ropes so they can build some experience before they actually get on the field. And speaking of young players that haven't been quite on the field yet, they had a pretty big rookie class, starting it off with the quarterback from LSU, Jaden Daniels. Very excited to kind of see what he can do. I think he'll do really, really well in this offense. I mean, I think if you look at his skill set and Kyler Murray's, take the size out of it, I think they're very similar to each other. I actually think Jaden Daniels has probably better like throwing mechanics than Kyler Murray, whereas like maybe Kyler Murray's a little bit better off platform. But again, I think those two skill sets are very similar to each other, and I think especially him, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson winning outside the numbers. I think this offense is going to be much better in 2024.
Yeah, no, I think so as well. I think the biggest thing is just going to be just their consistency to see how they go and do. But Jaden Daniels is a lot more dynamic than Sam Howell is. I think that's one of the things. If we want to move on now to their offensive depth chart here, that you'll see is on our lads right now. But that to me, I think is going to be the biggest thing is just going to be how does Jaden Daniels mesh and just can't kind of keep developing. And that's going to be a 2024 season long story. What I'm going to be curious about in the offseason is going to be how this offensive line comes together, especially then too. It's already center to left tackle are all new players. The guy in free agency as well. So what's going to be the formation that they end up going with is someone like Brandon Coleman maybe going to be able to bounce up and potentially be a starter. Who knows? Probably not, but still, it's I think just trying to get some sort of unity on that offensive line so that Jaden Daniels can get a little bit more consistent there. I do find it interesting that they have Austin Eckler as the number one running back. I definitely think it's going to be a running back by committee rule, and so Eckler might get a little bit more time. But I also think too Brian Robinson Jr. I feel could also have a lot of team one reps as well.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing to me is going to be start on the offensive line because we know obviously the season long story is going to be Jaden Daniels and just how he ends up doing. So to give him the best success possible, you have to have a consistent offensive line. And I am kind of curious to just see how Luke McCaffrey does him. They have him slotted there on the first team. That'd be a great little kind of find. Some people thought that'd be early. There's maybe a reach to go and get him there now with the 100th pick. But if they read him correctly and if he's anything like how his last name, how everybody thinks of his last name, I think maybe they got a steal in this draft, taking him at 100 instead of hoping that he falls.
Yeah, that to me, I think so. You have Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. I think both of those guys are fairly well established in the wide receiver one and wide receiver two roles. Who else fills in from there? Because you got a lot of other names that are going to be competing for the third, fourth, fifth, maybe six if they keep six wide receivers. But Jamison Crowder, Demir Bird, Deami Brown, Dax Milne, Olamide Zacchaeus, and then Luke McCaffrey is there as well. You got to think, being a third round pick, he's probably a roster lock. But how many snaps is he getting? How much is he actually going to contribute? Really curious to kind of see that
Well,
there.
this is
So,
where I think too, because if you're looking at that role, I wouldn't be surprised at the start of the season if Olamide Zacchaeus maybe gets a little bit more start, especially in serious minutes if it's close in the fourth quarter, just because of that veteran experience. As Luke McCaffrey just kind of gets his sea legs, wouldn't be surprised maybe then if there is that transition, if he is going to be a slot receiver. But I also think too, a lot of times as well, what we'll see with Cliff Kingsbury, we saw with Eric Bieniemy, but they had a lot of four receiver sets last year, so potentially could see both of them out on the field at the same time.
mhm.
Same thing with Deami Brown also. So I think that's another kind of other aspect as well as how's Cliff Kingsbury going to really utilize Jaden Daniels in the squad to their full talents. Seeing just how this offense progresses. So it with rebuilding teams, obviously it's kind of generic on the overall main storylines because obviously how's a rookie QB doing? How's he meshing with those receivers? How's this offensive line who is definitely reconstructed to say the least. How are they looking? I think our pieces starting to come together. A lot of those is going to be talking about this in these articles. Be like, oh, this player looks good. Like, oh, is he a potential rookie of the year candidate? Like, all this kind of these articles just because they have to fill the time. We're not obviously
Mhm.
really not going to know until week 4, week 5, week 6, week 7, kind of seeing that progression of these teams, and that's where it's going to be fascinating to see how Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury are able to kind of put this team together, and will they actually be more confident than what they were last year?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of storylines here on the offensive side of the ball does not really change. I think for the defensive side of the ball, you have four new edge rushers coming in from free agency. You did draft one as well in Javante Jean Baptiste all the way in the seventh round. So going to be interesting. Just I think all across the defensive line, who slots in where, who is starting, who's going to be in true pass rushing situations. I think the only for sure probably on this defensive side of the ball is that Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen will be the starting at the center of this defensive line, uh, barring injury to one of those guys. So
Yeah,
that's going to be interesting to follow. I think the second level of this defense, you have Benjamin St. Just, Jamin Davis, Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner. You have a bunch of guys that are going to contribute in different ways there. And then the secondary, Jeremy Chin was brought in. They drafted Mike Sanders still with their second round pick. You have Emmanuel Forbes still from last year. If maybe he could contribute. I mean, they have a lot of names here that I think are intriguing. We just have no idea how they're all going to fit together.
yeah, and that's just where it'll be interesting to see how Dan Quinn puts his defense together. Wouldn't be surprised if we maybe have a similar kind of approach to how Brian Flores had last year, where like
Hmm.
clearly there's some faults on this defense, so we're just going to be uber aggressive and potentially really trying to mix things up, get offenses on their heels and trying to just pick up all these blitzers. Wouldn't be surprised if that's something that Dan Quinn does, just because he is a defensive guru. We saw the defense that he put together in Dallas when he was defensive coordinator. Now, as a Falcons fan, I remember what that defense was like towards the end of his tenure in Atlanta when he was the head coach, and maybe his was able to fully focus on the defensive side of the ball. So I have to kind of wait and see how that ends up transpiring for him and this overall defense. But as we kind of said at the beginning, I think getting Dan Quinn in here is probably the best thing for this organization.
Yeah.
Really can't get any worse for this Commander team when you go look at those stats, especially secondary wise. Like you can only go up, and so I think bringing in Jeremy Chin, getting Mike Sandstrill, I think moving Emmanuel Forbes slowly down the depth chart is going to be good for the defense just as a whole. I also think too. Then
Hmm.
when it comes to scheming wise, I always love maybe just because like we watched a lot of Colts game growing up, and Jack Del Rio was the head coach for Jacksonville, but so that's why it was never really that much success there. But I always felt like Jack Del Rio just never was a good coach in general, but he keeps bouncing around and not really able to have that much good performance. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments if you guys think otherwise. But once again, too, I think him being the defensive coordinator, kind of the point that I'm getting to here, which was also wasn't really setting up this Commanders defense for success as having been the defensive coordinator here. So I think having Dan Quinn in there, much more defensive minded head coach, much more success on the field when like rebuilding these defenses. And as a Falcons fan, there were good seasons when Atlanta had one of the top defenses. And so thanks to Dan Quinn and that offense as well.
Yeah.
So it can really only go up here. I think it'll be interesting to see what the starting lineup is going to be, because to your point, there's a lot of guys. I think a lot of veterans who are finishing out their last couple of years, a lot of young guys that have potential, but maybe just because of the situation they're in, have really struggled to really shine, just because maybe poor coaching or just poor play around them. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity here, seeing which is kind of the whole defensive starting lineup will be outside of Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. Those two guys are locks. Very curious to see what the starting lineup is going to be come week 1.
Yeah, no, me as well. You said something that actually was very interesting in my eyes, because now that I think
Thank
about
you.
it, one of the things that Atlanta did so well when Dan Quinn was a head coach and Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator was that offense would generate so many explosive plays. The Falcons knew on defense that like other teams are going to have to keep up, and that's why that defense that year was so good, was because they kind of played that cover 3 shell and like made teams kind of throw into them,
Mm-hmm.
because again, they knew you're not going to win this game by running for 4 yards every single play. You're going to have to throw 10, 15 yards down the field. You're going to have to keep up with Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Taylor Gabriel, Austin Hooper, like Devontae Freeman. Kyle Shanahan's going to scheme these guys open as well, on top of those guys just having great natural abilities. And
Yeah.
so I think you look at what Cliff Kingsbury's going to do. When he was at Arizona, they were one of the top offenses in the league, especially through the first 10 weeks or so. They were super duper explosive. And I think Dan Quinn targeted him as a guy that can come in and then build this defense out. I think Jeremy Chin reminds me a little bit of Keanu Neal, as well as that big physical safety that can kind of play down in the box and be a little bit more mobile than like an undersized linebacker. And so I really like the idea of that. And so, sorry, you saying that like the Falcons had a really good defense, like they were just very opportunistic, and I think that's what Dan Quinn is going to be going for, and that's what Dallas did as well with their
Yeah.
offense.
Yeah.
So
And it's kind of what we saw last year, too. I mean, we saw the numbers that Dallas put up. And
yeah,
that defense, a lot of the times, when we saw the Dallas defense be at their best, is they put their opposing team in passing situations a lot, and you just, hey, Mike Parsons, pin your ears back, just go get the ball. But then when that
yeah,
defense struggled, some of those teams got leads, and they're like, all right, we're just going to run the ball right at Mike Parsons, and that really was kind of their whole. That was, they really put their defense into a tough situation because they couldn't get after the passer,
yeah,
trying to make these stops here, and they just weren't as good of a run blocking team here as they would have, or run defense team as they would have liked in those situations. I think here, I think it's going to be still a rebuilding year. As you can see, they're going to be rebuilding around Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. So very curious to see like who kind of comes out at top here. See how Mike Santrell does in his rookie year, if he can be kind of a more consistent force there in the secondary than some of the other people that they drafted the past couple of years. So it'll just be interesting to see how things develop here. And so let's kind of move on now to just like their schedule and go into our record prediction here. And so very, I think benign schedule. Whenever they're in the NFC East, it's going to be a tough schedule just because of the rivalries and everything. Even though the Giants didn't do that well last year, and the Eagles fell off as well, all those games are still tough, and they always will be. So you're still going to have 6 tough games against the Giants, Eagles, and Dallas, just because of the division rivalry. But starting off at Tampa Bay, then you go New York, and then at Cincinnati on Monday night, then at Arizona, and then hosting Cleveland, and then at Baltimore. Pretty tough schedule, I will say.
yeah,
Against the NFC South, reigning champions there. New York Giants division rival, as I said, and then Cincinnati. Arizona is supposed to be significantly better. I will say I'm going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm going to take the over of Marvin Harrison Jr. passing on receiving yards in
yeah,
that game. And then Cleveland on paper should be one of the best teams just with kind of what they've done and how they've performed overall. I think that Deshaun Watson, all those guys stay healthy, uh, that they should have one of the better offenses in the league as well. And then at Baltimore, I think that's a really tough 6 games. I think they can win 1 or 2, like maybe Tampa, New York, maybe Arizona. But I think it's going to be a tough opening stretch for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm looking at 1-5 through the first 6 games. I think the only real winnable game on this schedule is going to be the Giants. I think I look at all 5 of the other teams, and I think they have the Commanders have a very tough path to victory. That's a pretty
Yeah.
tough schedule to start. You also have to think not a first time head coach, but a new head coach with this organization, a rookie quarterback likely going to be starting in all of these games, a new offensive coordinator who's implementing a new offense with all of these players. So a pretty tough gauntlet, I think, going through the starting gates for the Washington Commanders. It does ease up as the season goes on. Second part of the season, week 7 through 14, you get Carolina. Chicago should be good. But again, also rookie quarterback. This defense was good last year. But again, rookie quarterback. The Giants should be a very winnable game. Pittsburgh, we don't know how good they'll be, but they weren't that good last year. Philly on Thursday Night Football, that could be a crapshoot, especially if Philly kind of continues some of the struggles that they've had from last year. Dallas and Tennessee, again, like both of those, I think are winnable games. And then Week 14 with the bye. I'm not saying they're going to go 500 coming out of here, but I think a lot of these games are winnable matchups.
Yeah. Uh, um, who knows? It's the thing for me when I look at it is like I think they're going to be picking the top 5 again.
Yeah.
Maybe top 10 for sure. So when you look at some of these matchups, it's like they're most likely going to be underdogs. Maybe not against Carolina. I have to see how they do, but Carolina improved also. And so we'll have to wait and see. Then wrapping up though at New Orleans, Philly, Atlanta, then at Dallas again. I think interesting stretch here. I have to see how New Orleans and Atlanta does, but as I mentioned earlier, Philly and at Dallas to end the season. Divisional games. Who knows what's going to be on the line here? And so, interesting schedule, manageable for a rebuilding team. They're definitely going to win some games here. So if we want to move on to our record prediction as well, uh, I have the Commanders going 4-13. I think I may be a little bit more on the pessimistic side. I think that they will probably going to be leaning more to picking again in the top 5 again, which is good for them because as of right now, you have that James Pierce Jr. edge rusher out of Tennessee who just looks like an absolute stud. He looks like the Caleb Williams of edge rushers. So if they can go and get him, I think Dan Quinn would absolutely love that, and then put him up with Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen as well. But I think probably more often than not, even as I look at that schedule here, I just think more often than not they're going to be the underdogs in those games, and I just think that they're going to definitely improve throughout the season. I think it's going to be a slow start just because rookie QB, new head coach, pretty much a whole new kind of system. And so say players coming in and out. So I think they're just going to be probably just on the losing end more than on the winning end.
Yeah, I also think they'll be on the losing end more than the winning end. But I went a little bit more optimistic in the sense of I think maybe they'll eke out a few games that people might not necessarily see because especially with this new offensive system, we saw this a little bit with uh, there were a few times in Kyler Murray's rookie year with Cliff Kingsbury that they just straight up outscored some teams, especially down the stretch when guys get a better feel for things. And I look at the schedule and I look at this division. I don't really know how tough it's going to be. Again, Philly had a major collapse at the end of last year. Dallas lost a lot in free agency on that defensive side of the ball, starting with Dan Quinn, which was a really big loss. This offense, I'm unsure of what it's going to be able to do. They lost a decent bit as well, and then the Giants suck. And like other than that, like there's like they play Chicago, they play Carolina, they play Tennessee, uh, like New Orleans. I don't really love. Like they have a decent bit of winnable games on their schedule, and there are some teams that they just might be able to outscore uh,
Yeah.
in in this. So all in all, I have a more optimistic look. 6-11 would still put them in the top 8 picks in the 2025 NFL draft, but like I could definitely see them being 4-11. I don't really see them being better than 6-11. I
Yeah.
just don't have that kind of confidence in them.
Well, and that's where if you're watching, like you just want to, I just want to see consistent growth throughout the season. Like, are we better? Are we clearly better than what we were? Like by week 18, are we clearly better than what we were in week 1? You know, just seeing that growth, see that young talent develop, and that's where I think it's going to be interesting team just to watch overall. But the NFC East, though, kind of as you said, is if they can get a couple games to go their way, and then who knows, like by week 10, week 11, they're starting to kind of catch their stride here as well. And Jaden Daniels is developing in that quarterback. So I agree with you. I think Philly's going to stay about how the same. I mean, they're going to improve a little bit to what they were the second half of the season. Um, but I think Dallas is going to regress. Giants, who really knows what's going to happen with them. So I think the Commanders have an opportunity to show a lot of good signs of life over the next couple of years. But I think they're mainly, I think just going to be young and just not ready yet for that moment.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go ahead and wrap up this video here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Washington Commanders 2024 offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? How good do you think the Commanders are going to be in 2024? And other than that, we will see you guys next time.